best is yet to come. There's always more to come. God, how great you are, great things you have done. For everything we've seen, there is more to come. Every victory, every battle won. For everything we've seen, there is more to come. All who are thirsty, come to the fountain, dip your heart in the stream of life. All who are thirsty, all who are weak, come to the fountain, dip your heart in the stream of life. Let the pain and the sorrow be washed away in the waves of His mercy. As the deep cries out to deep, we sing, come, Lord Jesus, come. Come, Lord Jesus, come. Come, Lord Jesus, come. All who are thirsty, all who are weak, come to the fountain, dip your heart in the stream of life. The pain and the sorrow be washed away in the waves of His mercy. As the deep cries out to deep, we sing, come, Lord Jesus, come. Come, Lord Jesus, come. Come, Lord Jesus, come. Nothing but your love for me, I want to feel when you come, Lord Jesus, come. 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 Sometimes it's hard for us to give God control, but that's what He wants from us. He wants our whole heart, our whole lives. Sing with me. Here I am. All my intentions, all my obsessions, I want to lay them all down in your hands. Only your love is vital. Though I'm not entitled, still you call me your child. God, you don't need me, but somehow you want me. Oh, how you love me. Somehow that frees me to take my hands off of my life and the way it should go. Oh, God, you don't need me, but somehow you want me. Oh, how you love me. Somehow that frees me to open my hands up and give you control. I give you control. I've had plans shattered and broken, things I had hoped in fall through my hands. You have plans to redeem and restore me. You're behind and before me. Oh, help me believe. God, you don't need me, but somehow you want me. Oh, how you love me. And somehow that frees me to take my hands off of my life and the way it should go. Oh, God, you don't need me, but somehow you want me. Oh, how you love me. And somehow that frees me to open my hands up and give you control. Sing this out. You want me. Somehow you want me. The King of Heaven wants me. Since this world has lost its grip on me, you want me. Somehow you want me. The King of Heaven wants me. Since this world has lost its grip on me, God, you don't need me, but somehow you want me. Oh, how you love me. And somehow that frees me to take my hands off of my life and the way it should go. Oh, God, you don't need me, but somehow you want me. Oh, how you love me. And somehow that frees me to open my hands up and give you control. You want me. Somehow you want me. The King of Heaven wants me. So this world has lost its grip on me. You want me. Somehow you want me. The King of Heaven wants me. So this world has lost its grip on me. God, you don't need me, but somehow you want me. Oh, how you love me. Somehow that frees me to take my hands off of my life and the way it should go. Whoa, God, you don't need me, but somehow you want me. Oh, how you love me. But somehow that frees me to open my hands up and give you control. I give you control.
God, we open our hands and free the ideas and ideals that we clutch onto that are not consistent with who you are and who you want us to be. We open our hands and our hearts to be free in Jesus from the hurt and the heartache of this world. We want to be used by you. We want you to be made famous in this world. And we want you to do that in and through us. We want more, God. Give us more. Amen.
Right from the beginning in chapter 1, we find a group of people, the Judeans, the Israelites, who have been taken captive, and they have been moved from their homeland into Babylon. And they've spent now a number of years where we've been following them. But we talked about this idea of exiles. They're living in exile. They're resident aliens, if you will. And this morning we're going to have the opportunity to hear from Richard and Lillian Phillips about how they fit into that story, really. Not the Judeans, not the Israelites, but how followers of Christ found themselves in a situation where they were living as resident aliens, in a situation where there's not much for influence when it comes to the gospel. And so look for those parallels as we've been looking at the book of Daniel as they come and they share. A couple of housekeeping things before I have them come up. One is, obviously weather was an issue last week. If you weren't here, we do put our services online. You can go online to the website, myalliancechurch.com, and you can find them there if you're interested in following up with what we talked about just now, last week, and leading into Richard and Lillian Phillips. Also, a great appreciation for those people that made, and they do a great work, but they come in to do the video ministry. While weather wasn't great, and they made it their priority to be here so that can be an option. That's pretty cool that we have people that are willing to do that. That also being said, last week we had people clearing the lot. We had people clearing the lot this last week with the ice. Yet, be careful. It is slippery out there. We've had 2 people fall already. Fortunately, they're very young people, Mitch and myself. So we recover fairly well, I think maybe if there's an issue, I'll wear a helmet next week. But really, in all seriousness, here's what I request or suggest. Maybe is a better way to do it. We've been really trying to keep. Obviously, we have the carport, keep that ice free. That's fairly easy. But with the nature of the way our land flows, that water goes down and that water freezes. We've really tried to keep the steps clear. So I realize that it might be a longer trip to go to the steps, but it's going to be a safer trip. I know this from experience, okay? So take the steps if you can. I realize that might be a few more steps for you to take, no pun intended, but I think overall people are going to be safer if we just kind of follow that path. I think that's all I have. Richard, Lillian, would you come and share with us this morning?
Thanks, Pastor. We're very happy to be with you here today, and it's our opportunity to reconnect with Terry and Val. And we were asked to tell about our experience in Vietnam during the Civil War between the North and the South. And we were taken captive for a period of time. Now, this is a long time ago. It was in 1975. But I think the message is good for us today, too. These days, international workers with the Alliance and with other missionary organizations are increasingly being exposed to danger. And that doesn't mean that they should quit and come home. God has made it very clear that his children should spread the good news of the gospel throughout the world, even to the dark places of the world. And that call is still as clear, is still as urgent as it ever was, and God's promise to be with his people is as clear as it ever was. So, in telling our story, I like to think of this as really being part of God's story, reaching out to the lost. He did it in Bible times. He is still doing it today. We were missionaries with the Christian and Missionary Alliance. We spent 17 years in Vietnam. We were there, well, most of the time we were there. There was a war going on. But the Lord was blessing in wonderful ways, people turning to the Lord much more than they had when things were calm and everything was comfortable. Where they were coming to the Lord and finding his help. My work was largely in Bible translation, not in Vietnamese. The Vietnamese Bible had been done years before we ever arrived. But up in the hills of Vietnam, there were a number of tribes, each tribe speaking its own language, and their languages were very different from Vietnamese. So it was our privilege to work with a couple of those tribes and prepare scriptures for them. That's what we were doing in 1975. In March of that year, the North Vietnamese launched their final attack that resulted in the takeover of all of the South. The entire country is now communist. We were in the first city to be attacked. I'm very thankful that missionaries in other places heard about what was happening in our town and were able to leave before the fighting reached them. But all of us missionaries in that town were picked up by the North Vietnamese and held captives for close to eight months. Part of that time was just out in the forest. When it rained, we got wet. It was a very primitive living conditions. Then for another 2.5 months, we were taken to right by a Vietnamese village. It seemed a little closer to civilization, and we were getting some medicines there. By that time, we were needing them. Then for the last part of it, the last 3 months or so, we were taken all the way up into North Vietnam. We had never been able to go there before, but we were held then in one of the prisons that had been used for our U.S. airmen who had been shot down. Now, all of those prisoners had been released 2 years before. All American troops had withdrawn from the country in 1973. But we were in one of those places. My wife and I had a whole room to ourselves for a change. That was very nice. But we could see marks on the floor and the ceiling where that room had once been divided into isolation cubicles. But those inner walls had all been taken away when we came. So this was our story, and it was from there that we were eventually released. I should go back to the moment of capture now. I had tried to keep in touch with people who were aware of the security situation. They had said where we were, there was no immediate problem. But then in March, about 3 o'clock in the morning, the mortars and the rockets started landing in the city, and we realized that that place was not so secure after all. The attack was on. My wife and I had no place to hide. We found what we thought would be the safest place in our house. It was a hall closet. At least there were a couple of thicknesses of wall between us and the outside. But then, as we heard the tremendous explosions and felt the ground shake and heard debris landing on our roof, we realized that our house would be no protection at all against a direct hit. We did a lot of praying that night. When morning came, we shouted across to some of our colleagues living right nearby, and we decided that if we could, we should try to get into town. We grabbed a suitcase. We always kept a suitcase packed in case we would have to leave quickly. Ran out to one of the vehicles and then started out for town. There was still fighting going on. We passed tanks in the street. I think they were surprised to see us suddenly emerge and roar past them. But where we were headed was the house of the American consular representative for that part of the country. He had invited us to his place in case of trouble. His house was more solidly built than ours, and that seemed like a good idea. And he said he had a radio. He could call down to the coast in time of trouble. They would send in a helicopter and fly us out. So we got to his house. We had only been there just a few minutes when we heard over that radio that the streets over which we had just passed were now in enemy hands. I think we had moved at the last possible moment, though we had no way of knowing that. So we were there. We tried to avoid calling attention to ourselves in any way. There was a battle going on. There were troops moving up and down the street in front of the house, tremendous explosions, smoke rising. It was really a fierce battle for several days. On the third day, the noise died down. We realized that the battle was over. The city was now in enemy hands. There wouldn't be any helicopter come for us. And somewhere we knew there was a house-to-house search beginning. And it would only be a matter of time before soldiers came to where we were. This was a time of real concern for us. Our mission had contact with the communists before. Back in 1962, the Viet Cong, as they were called, came into the leprosarium, which our mission ran, and took away 3 of the missionaries, including the doctor in charge. And from that day until this, there's been no sure word about what happened to them. In 1968, there was the great Tet Offensive, fighting all over the country, but only in our town, Ban My Thuot, did missionaries lose their lives. 6 of our colleagues were killed right on the compound where we lived. My wife and I happened to be away attending a workshop on literacy at the time, so we were spared. but those who were there died, and it was at the moment that they surrendered to communist troops that the soldiers opened fire on them. So now we were waiting for our first face-to-face meeting with those troops with a feeling of fearfulness. But the Lord encouraged our hearts. We had our Bibles, we had our group, we quoted some of the Psalms, we sang some of the Psalms. One of them that was especially precious to us was Psalm 91. He that dwelleth in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. I will say of the Lord, He is my refuge and my fortress, my God, in Him I will trust. And then near the end of the psalm, God makes a promise to His people. He says, He shall call upon me, and I will answer him. I will be with him in trouble. I will deliver him and honor him. And so, at a time when we knew that we were in trouble, we had this promise that God was with us. Well, the soldiers did come to our house. We could see them working on the lock at the front gate. So 2 of us went out to surrender to them and to tell them that there were other civilians inside. And then the order came for us to go out, lined up in the middle of the street. We were searched. And then, to our surprise, they ordered us into one of the vehicles that was there. It was the one in which we had driven there, and so it still had our suitcases in it. And we were very thankful for the contents of those suitcases in the months that followed. But there were more of us now. Other people had sought refuge in the same house with us, and we were kind of crammed into that vehicle, perched on top of the suitcases, and in that way we were driven off into the forest as prisoners of the Vietnamese communists. I'm going to ask Lillian to come and tell a little bit about our life in the forest.
I'm Lillian. I'm glad to be here too. Well, when we were first captured, or when we were ordered out of the building, I'll backtrack a little bit, I was very frightened. I was just shaking. And when the order came to, walk out with our arms raised, my husband walked ahead of me to take whatever would come first. And we knew God was at our side. But from then on, we were captured. We had lost our freedom. We were Americans, but we had lost our freedom. There was no doubt about it. When we were first captured, they told us not to speak in English anymore, but to speak in Vietnamese when we were in their presence, so they'd know what we were talking about. We were always behind a stockade of barbed wire or bamboo. And once, before we were taken from one camp to the other, we were tied one to the other. And I didn't like that. I thought, I came here to love these people, and they're tying me. And so I felt very badly. Betty Mitchell, maybe you've heard that name before, it was her husband that was captured in 1962 and never was seen again. She looked down at me, and she knew what was going through my mind. And she said, Lillian, remember, Jesus did so much for us than this. And that helped me a lot. And we Christians were able to support each other in that way. But when there was no release or no escape, I had a prayer, added prayer, that the beauty of Jesus would be seen in us. Now, it wasn't a physical beauty. And certainly after the months went by, with the loss of hair and sunken eyes, it wasn't a physical beauty. It was a spiritual beauty. And you know, there's an InterVarsity song that says, "Make his beauty rest upon me as I seek the lost to save, and may they forget the channel, seeing only him." And so this time when we were put into the truck along with 40 other prisoners, of course no seats in that truck, all crammed together, we went on the Ho Chi Minh Trail up and down, and I'll tell you, it's not paved. It was just a forest and a mud road. And we were taken to our first camp. About 3 a.m, we were released and let down, and we said, well, where are we going to sleep? They said, well, there's some straw, lie on that, and so we did. The next morning, we saw better where we were. It was a camp with about 1,000 South Vietnamese soldiers that had been caught by the North Vietnamese. Well, our living quarters, we found out, were not fancy. There was no privacy. We were in a bamboo hut held up by bamboo poles with a thatch roof, and then the floor was just some more bamboo that was flattened out, and that was our house. But you know, you can't be that close to the jungle floor without meeting other creatures of the forest. And so there were snakes, there were scorpions, and different things, but thank the Lord that I was never bitten or stung, although some of our group did experience something. Our days started very early because the communists have a big thing about exercising. 5 o'clock in the morning, we had to get up, have exercises, and roll call. Now, roll call was much more serious because I wanted to know if any had escaped. When we were first captured, there were some young fellows that had gotten restless and tried to escape, and they were shot. But we were given food twice a day, about 10 o'clock in the morning and 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And we were issued a bowl. This was a bowl. We had a bowl of rice in the morning and a bowl of rice in the evening, cooked rice. And then they also issued us a towel. Now you say it looks a little grubby, but remember we didn't have a whole lot of soap. And there were so many prisoners that I put a letter P in the corner so that we'd remember which was ours. So when the rest of the day, we had to stay in that area. And so when we didn't have time to feed our physical bodies, we could feed our spiritual lives because we were allowed to keep our Bibles. Are you surprised? We were. Mine was given to me when I was 13 years old by my parents. It was very precious to me. And I noticed that my husband was really searching the scriptures. And you see, we didn't know how long we would have the scriptures with us. But we thank the Lord that we did have the scriptures because it was the scriptures that made our hopes bright for the future because we knew God was in control. Well, so you say, well, what else did you have to eat? Well, we had this rice, and sometimes they added a salty broth, but we found if we ate too much of that broth, we started swelling up because of the salt content. Some of the South Vietnamese soldiers climbed trees and tried to get leaves for some vegetables. But one day we had a treat because somebody took pity on little Luann. Now first I have to tell you that when we had all these prisoners together. They were clumped in little groups. And we expatriates, which was only 13 of us, Filipino, Australian, Canadian, and American, we were kept in one group. And so there were 13 of us, and little Luann, who was the daughter of a Wycliffe couple, Carolyn and John Miller, was given a banana. And the mother took that banana, she cut it into 13 pieces, because she couldn't give it all to her daughter. Another day we had a better treat, because one of the soldiers, prisoners, had caught an iguana in the river. You all know what an iguana is? This was a 5-foot-long iguana. It was killed, cooked, and made into soup. I'll never forget that day because my husband came to me with a bowl of soup. I had just had another case of malaria with the chills and fever, and I'd just come out of it when he said, "Here, honey, is a bowl of soup." Well, it was iguana soup, and it was delicious. It was the first meat we had had in many months. So you say, what did it really taste like? A whole lot like chicken. But we thank the Lord that even if it was only a bowl of rice, Dick and I, or Richard and I, could pray together, because one of the miracles was that we were allowed to stay together, and my husband was my protector. But the best time of the day for me was when we were allowed to go down to the river to bathe. See, they could not take care of that many prisoners without being near a source of water. And the highlands of Vietnam have many, many streams. And so once a day, we women, there were only 5 of us, well, 4 plus our little Luann, went down to the river to bathe. Always a guard there, of course. And I just loved that time. I'd look up at the blue, blue sky, white fluffy clouds, and see the thick green foliage of the jungle. And sometimes birds would swoop down and pick fish out of the river. And I thought, this is mine. This is all mine. I'm as free, as high as the sky. They had taken many things from us, but they could never take that out of my heart. But when I went back to camp, and we were on these long pallets, you'd say, of wood in some cases, and maybe 100 prisoners in one of these huts. When I'd come back and see the South Vietnamese soldiers who were looking so depressed, some were sick, some of them just depressed. They didn't know what would happen the next day, neither did we, but we knew a God who was in control. And so when I came back, sometimes I'd feel guilty seeing that I was so happy and they were so sad. And so I said to my husband, do you think it's wrong that I feel so good in prison camp? And he said, no, honey. I pray every day that the Lord will keep that joy in your heart. And the Lord does say that a merry heart does good like a medicine. Well, by the 3rd camp, they had captured the country, and we were given more space to move around in our stockade. And so we had time on our hands, and we made up some games. Well, my husband had the mission account book. One of the questions they asked us in interrogation always was, who pays you? Well, you know who it was, it's you. It's the Alliance churches who paid us. But he took the account book and he removed all the pages, put them down in the latrines where there are a lot of maggots, and got rid of the evidence. But I said, honey, save that cover. Everything was important to us. A bit of cardboard, a string, a rubber band, anything. And I thought, well, as a nurse, I could put the bowl of rice on my tray and take it to those who were sick. Well, we had 3 linguists in the group, the Wycliffe couple and my husband. They had a much better idea for this piece of cardboard. They made a Scrabble game. We spent many hours challenging each other. We also had our hobbies. One man, Australian, he got big thick thorns out of the forest and he carved an entire set of chessmen. Well, I had my own hobby and I caught butterflies. You see, I was thinking of our children who were away at Dalat school, and when they were home on vacation, they would just run around catching butterflies. And I thought, well, how could I still be a good mother? And I thought, well, I could catch butterflies, and maybe someday I would be reunited with my children. My first net was just a plastic bag with a bamboo hoop and a handle. I went around catching butterflies. Well, you can't be with that many men without a lot of advice. So they were telling me how to catch them. Well, we did catch 45 different kinds. But when those butterflies went over the stockade, I couldn't get them. One day, the guard with his gun came and he said, "Give me that net." And he got the butterfly. So you say everything was fun and games. No, it wasn't. These were the few things that we did to keep our minds open and our hearts free. There were hard times. There were times of sickness, interrogation, many stresses. One of the stresses that was really hard for me was when one day we were ordered to sit on the ground in a semicircle, and they said, "We're going to take your jewelry." And I thought, no, not mine. That would include my wedding ring and my engagement ring. But I knew I couldn't argue with men with guns and bayonets. And so I started to cry. Then the Lord reminded me, "Give thanks in all things." I said, "Lord, how can I give thanks when I'm physically crying?" He said, "Because you're doing it for me." I remembered the many times I had said, "Yes, Lord, I'll go wherever you want me to go." One time was at the old Spivey, now Crown College. He said, "Because you're doing it for me." I said yes, and that had led me to Vietnam and to prison camp. And so I decided that when the time came, my husband would take my rings off. I would take his off, and I would not cry. And the time came, Richard took my rings off, and I took his off, and I did not cry. But you know, you can never outgive God, because in about 5 days, a commander, higher authority came, and he said, "Give back that jewelry." And so I wear on my hand those same rings. God is so good. But then at nighttime, I would say would be the very hardest time, when you're sleeping practically on the jungle floor and everything is dark. It wasn't the things we had seen during the day that bothered us so much. It was the unanswered questions. How long will this be? We knew the servicemen had been in captivity for years. Will I ever see my children again? We have 4. They were 13, 11, 9, and 6. And then it was that my husband quoted scripture to me to encourage my heart. But you know, some of the scriptures that were the most helpful to us were what we had memorized as children. Some, "The Lord is my shepherd. I have everything I need." And other wonderful verses. I won't take time to say them all. But for my children, I took Deuteronomy 33:27. "The everlasting God is your refuge, and underneath are the everlasting arms." And I thought, you know what? Even if my arms never were around my children again, they were away at Dalat school, I knew God's arms were there underneath them, and his love was surrounding them.
there were mental trials as well as physical, because every so often, frequently, a guard would come, take away one of our number out beyond the stockade to a hut in the forest. Then the political officer would come in and start asking questions. Why did you come to Vietnam? Where have you lived? What did you do? Who pays you? To whom do you send your reports? And so on and so on. These questions would start early in the morning, go on through the noon hour into the afternoon, just one question after another. Some of us were accused of not telling the whole truth about why we were in Vietnam, or of having committed crimes against the Vietnamese people by cooperating in some way with the South Vietnamese government. I was told at one time that unless I made some clear statement denouncing U.S. involvement in Vietnam, I couldn't expect to be released for a long time. Well, we felt that as missionaries, we were not involved in politics, which we weren't, and I felt that if I started making political statements, it would compromise the work of our mission, maybe in that country and in other parts of the world too. And so it seemed like we might be there for a long time. As it turned out, we were released only 3 weeks later. I guess it was just a threat to see what we might say. But these were difficult times, and we came to depend very heavily on the support of other Christians in our group. We had our Bibles, we had Sunday services. We had Sunday services all the time, every week that we were there. Nobody ever stopped us. Once the guard told us not to sing so loudly, and when some of the Vietnamese soldiers, the South Vietnamese soldiers who were prisoners with us, wanted to join in, the guards made them stay away. But we had this support, and when one person was being interrogated, he knew that the others were praying for him and would be there to support him afterwards. I remember one day, Lillian had a particularly grueling session and came back discouraged. And one of the other women brought over a verse that had encouraged her. In the version that she had, it sounds like this. This is in 1 Peter 3. Usually, no one will hurt you for wanting to do good, but even if they should, you are to be envied, for God will reward you for it. Quietly trust yourself to Christ your Lord. And if anyone asks you why you believe as you do, be ready to tell him, and do it in a gentle and respectful way. Well, that verse was a big help to us, and it was a reminder to us that we did have a terrific opportunity right there of telling people about why we believed as we did. Because every interrogator, and we had quite a few of them, would always start by asking, why did you come to Vietnam? And so it was the opportunity to tell them why, to tell them about our Lord, how He had worked in our lives, had changed us, had sent His people all over the world to share with others what God had done for them. That's why we were there. That's why we were in Vietnam. That's why missionaries go all over the world. And so we had this opportunity to tell over and over again of why we had come to Vietnam. It was a strange thing that was happening. You know, our Alliance mission had worked in North Vietnam for 40 years, up until the time when the bamboo curtain came down and the North became completely communist. All missionaries had to leave. Most of them just moved on to South Vietnam and kept right on working. But in the North, there was no more missionary influence. There was a church there. There is a church there to this day, and is doing very well. But no missionary influence. Then, 21 years later, the communists brought us up into North Vietnam and kept requiring us to tell them why we had come to Vietnam. It was just an amazing thing that was happening, and we were thankful that we could be there to tell what the Lord was doing. I think maybe this was part of the reason why this all happened and we were prisoners. The Lord hadn't given up on North Vietnam and wanted His word proclaimed there again. And it was a privilege to do so. Now, Lillian will tell us how we got out.
I'm just going to tell you, these little cups and this teapot is what we used during the interrogation. We were supposed to bring them with us, and then the interrogator would pour tea for us, and then he'd invite me to drink tea, but I knew the right thing to do. I invited him to drink tea first. But anyways, before we were released, I asked to keep them so I could remember how God gave us the opportunity to witness in North Vietnam. Well, it was October 28th, 2 days before we were released. We were told, you're going to be released. We thought, is that true? So many things had not turned out true. But it was true. A bus came, and we were taken to the Hanoi airport. However, before we left, the man who was in charge of us, the communist, he said, I want to tell you two things. First of all, I want to tell you, you are different from other prisoners that we have captured. And I hope the difference was the beauty of Jesus that they saw in our lives. The second thing he said is, you will not be given back any paperwork. That meant all my husband's 17 years of translation work. And this was very saddening to us. But the Lord knows. And we leave it in His hands. So we were taken to the Hanoi airport, and there the cameras were rolling. We were served tea in real china cups, and then we were given other gifts and put on the plane for, first of all, Vientiane, Laos, and then on to Bangkok. When we got on the plane and we were sitting down, I said to my husband, now we're free. He said, no, Laos is also a communist country. But you know, we had been turned over to the UNHCR, United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. We had been turned into refugees now. And there was a representative on the plane, and he came down the aisle and he said, many, many people have been praying for you. Not until we came out did we realize how so many of our alliance churches in particular had been praying for us. We thank you. We're an answer to prayer. But then we did, he was a Christian, by the way. We got to Laos, and there we met an American representative, and he telephoned or wired or whatever they do to the United States that we were all alive. And I think that was the first time my parents knew that I was really alive. And then they gave us a little plate of egg salad sandwiches. They didn't think that we could eat very much. Well, I'll tell you, we wiped those out really in a hurry. Then we get to Bangkok, and there were many people there to meet us. Dr. Nathan Bailey, our president, was there, Dr. L.L. King, and many, many colleagues and friends, but our children were not there. And this is who this mother was looking for. But they did give me an envelope full of letters from our children. Every missionary kid has to write a letter every week to their parents. They saved our children's letters and gave them to us at the airport. One of them was from my little Johnny, our little Johnny, just 6. And it was very lumpy. So I opened it up, and out dropped 3 little teeth. No, he hadn't thought of saving it. I'm sure he thought of those money under his pillow. But Charlotte Stemple, you'll know that name maybe, she had saved it, and then I knew my little boy was being taken care of by somebody with a mother's heart. She was a dorm parent at the Lot School. From then we went to Hong Kong and Hawaii to get back into civilization, they said. I was waiting to get to America. And then finally we got to California, where we found our 4 children were being taken care of by their guardian, my brother. And so we were met at the Ontario, California airport. And when the plane landed, some announcement must have been made that the Phillipses had to stay back. And a lady behind me said, "Oh, there must be somebody very important on this plane." And I looked out the window, and then I saw the movie cameras and all that kind of stuff. And in my heart I said, "No, lady, it's nobody important. It's just a mother coming home to her 4 children." And the doors opened, and there were our children. I saw little Johnny, long red hair, he was 75, and one long tooth, one short tooth. I thought he looked a lot like Huckleberry Finn. But he was the cutest little fellow I had ever seen. And then there was Ruthie, and she'd come running, 9-year-old, with her legs going like pinwheels. And then there was Brian and Jeannie, 13-year-old Jeannie, 9-year-old Brian. And they were in our arms again. Remember, God had given me that verse. They were in our arms, but I thank the Lord that in the meantime, many other people had been loving them and caring for them. And I thank you also for your prayers. And we'll continue with questions in the Sunday school.
Well, thank you, Richard and Lillian. So they will be sharing question and answer time during the small group time. That'll take place in here. We will have a time once we conclude here. I'm going to invite Lane and Kevin and the worship team. We'll kind of wrap up the service with a moment to reflect on what it is that we've heard. What a great picture that we've been talking about in Daniel. This just kind of puts a little more, kind of brings it home a little bit, doesn't it? Puts a little bit of flesh to it, where the struggle that we see as followers of Christ, and we're in this world, we're in this place that is not truly our home. We have somewhere else that's more to come. We have somewhere else that's promised for us, and that's what we wait for. But in the meantime, this is where we are, and we engage in the ministry that the Lord has put us in. Sometimes it's very uncomfortable, but yet He is faithful to us even while we're far from home.
Stand and sing with us.
All my life long I had panted for a drink from some cool spring that I hoped would quench the burning of the thirst I felt within. Hallelujah, He has found me, the one my soul so long has craved. Jesus satisfies all my longings, through His blood I now am saved. Feeding on the filth around me, till my strength was almost gone. Longed my soul for something better, only still to longer on. Hallelujah, He has found me, what my soul so long has craved. Jesus satisfies all my longings, through His blood I now am saved. For I wasn't sought for riches, something that would satisfy, but the dust I gathered round me only marked my soul's sad cry. Hallelujah, He has found me, the one my soul so long has craved. Jesus satisfies all my longings, through His blood I now am saved. Well of water, ever springing, bread of life so rich and free, untold wealth that never faileth, my Redeemer is to me. Hallelujah, He has found me, the one my soul so long has craved. Jesus satisfies all my longings, through His blood I now am saved. Hallelujah, He has found me, the one my soul so long has craved. Jesus satisfies all my longings, through His blood I now am saved. Through His blood I now am saved. Through His blood I now am saved.
You guys are dismissed. Have a great day.